children are here, they would have been very pleased. Those were extremely gracious and generous words. And I know how they spring from your heart because you boarded at Montfort at Erkard. That's where you began your schooling. And Tamil Nadu is a place which welcomes everyone. And this is where you began. Thank you, thank you. Our next speaker is Mr.Ram. Mr. Ram needs no introduction either. None of these people need an introduction. From 2013, October 2013, Mr. Ram is the managing director of the Hindu group of publications. We know Ram rather well. Those from the right wing, and I see that the left seems to be rather empty. Ram, please note, would actually find the Hindu, the title of his newspaper, an oxymoron. They would actually advise him, telling him that it lacks one particular word before, an adjective before the Hindu, anti. That's how leftist he is. His leftist credentials are very deeply rooted. When he went to Loyola, he was part of the All India Students Federation. He was probably a card-carrying communist then. Now he doesn't carry the card. That's the difference. Ram made the mistake of giving me the opportunity in 1995 to write when I first came back from the UN. He launched my writing career. I owe much to him. But in addition to him having made a name in investigative journalism when it came to Bofors, having won the highest civilian award of Sri Lanka given to a non-Sri Lankan, and many other honors and prizes to him. He also played Ranji. He was a wicket keeper and a batsman, and nothing can beat that. And I overheard R.M.Veerappan asking Ram, how old are you? That is indeed a compliment. He looks as he looked when I first came to make his acquaintance in '95. May he keep looking that way. And I want to thank him now and invite him over to felicitate. Thank you.
Thank you, Karan. Friends, it's a great pleasure to see this book and have the opportunity to read this, because this is what was planned a long time ago. As Kannan mentioned, when I first met him in 1995, it was a little later than when Sashi knew him, 3 or 4 years later. He had this ambition of writing, and I remember the article he did for Frontline on Croatia, but his heart was in the Dravidian movement, and he introduced himself as being part, his family was part of the Dravidian movement, its roots went back, and he still retained his broad loyalty to the movement, although he had the challenge of locating himself as a professional and as an intellectual in a particular slot in that movement. And a little later in 2005, when he began, or 2004 I think, when he began to write about Anna, the birth anniversary of Anna, 94, 95, 96, he would come up with an article every year for the Hindu. Then we talked about more ambitious things, not just articles, not just journalistic articles, but something that needed to be done. A biography of Anna first, a remarkable public figure, a visionary, a man who combine many gifts, many interests,
many streams, historical, and then of course others in the movement. And naturally he had his eye trained on M.G.R. as well, after M.G.R. passed away in 1987, December. So I'm glad that he persevered in this effort, not just satisfying himself with writing articles to mark every anniversary or some occasion, but do a proper biography. And this is, I think, the achievement or the culmination of that project. And I'm very happy that he got full support, such fine support from Sathi over such a long period, both in his career, professional career, and in his intellectual pursuits, and in particular this particular project. And there is much more to be done. Already reference has been made to, we need a major biography of Kalaignar. And these biographies cannot be hagiographies. That's not what people want. They should be, once, if you're a historian, you don't necessarily judge people. You, of course, evaluate, you interpret, you're critical. But historians don't have to give highly opinionated judgments on good or bad and so on. This is what we learn from great historians like Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib and various others, whose dominance cannot be challenged in the field of Indian history. They have to constantly reinterpret what happens, using new material that comes to hand, using your own experiences to handle that process of reinterpreting what has happened. And this is exactly what a biographer with a historical sense, but who's clearly decided not to be hagiographic, that is, just praise people uncritically, make them icons even long after they are gone. So I think that is important, and in both, and of course, in these biographies, Kannan, the author, is deeply sympathetic or empathetic to the two people involved, but you've got to maintain your distance, notwithstanding your family's closeness to the Dravidian movement or to the particular party or leader or whatever. A critical distance, but an empathy as well, a sympathy or empathy. But otherwise, why do it if you're not interested? Of course, there are cases where there are biographies of people who are evil, like Hitler and so on. I'm not talking about it. But people in public life, most of them, whether it is Indira Gandhi or Annadurai or Kalaignar or M.G.R. and various others who are still going strong, I think you need to maintain that critical distance while retaining some kind of empathy. And Kannan, I think, achieves that. Even more in the M.G.R. biography than in the first one, which was published in 2010. Although that was pioneering, because nobody had written in the English language for a broad audience, national, outside Tamil Nadu, national as well as international, a proper biography of this outstanding leader, C.N. Annadurai, who, as Sachi has obliquely acknowledged, there was a watershed moment when a party that was a movement that was underestimated, in fact, a very respected Congress leader called them Kuttadi Kachi, party of dancers, actors, people who just street performers, that sort of thing. Condescension, contempt. But can you think of a greater miscalculation, a greater political miscalculation than that? This came from no less than Kamaraj, who was respected highly by Periyar as well as Anna and others, who always referred to them with great respect and even esteem. But this underestimation of the Dravidian movement, and in particular after it entered mass politics, the DMK, the undivided DMK, I think is very notable, is very significant in Indian politics, and as a political journalist, I have long followed this process, because what happened in 1967 was permanent. The dominant party in the political system, the Congress, was permanently relegated to the position of a junior partner. Now it's not a junior partner. I'm not minimizing its role. It did well elsewhere and so on, but in Tamil Nadu, what appeared to be a transient phenomenon became permanent, set in stone. So if you say that the DMK and the AIADMK under M.G.R. and Jayalalitha, but not today I think, were the two dominant parties in the political system belonging to the A League or the first division. The other parties were only in League, second division or third division, junior partners. Congress in the second division, BJP and so on hardly mattered over the long period. And this I think was important, and for a long time I have observed this phenomenon, this underestimation. And in an article published in February 1979 in the Economic and Political Weekly, titled The Dravidian Movement in its Pre-Independence Phases, I'm pleased to say I sharply criticize the authoritarian logic inherent in glib condemnations of regional forces and the arrogant advocacy of an allegedly ideal two-party model for India. People often talk about, we don't want so many parties, there's too much fragmentation in the system. Let's just have two parties. How do you do it? Is it feasible? Have you done any kind of reality check about Indian politics and the polity? But that I think is no longer the case. Now it's pretty well acknowledged that India is not, if not fully federal, is at least mostly federal, and certainly in a political sense, India is very federal. And attempts, including by the present, those in power in Delhi, to impose an authoritarianism, saying that we are the permanent dominant force. I think there will be a political reckoning one day. The same kind of arrogance that brought the Congress low will happen to anyone else who tries to succeed to that throne in Delhi. If you do not respect federalism, if you do not respect parties that are called regional parties, parties that are dominant in a state or in a particular part of the country or a region, then you're going to get into trouble down the road, no question about it. This is a political lesson that has to be learned, and Kannan's work, I think, expresses this without being dogmatic, without being too obvious. I think there's an underlying appraisal of this movement. And so far as the Dravidian movement is concerned, there are unfinished tasks. Where is the proper biography of one of the outstanding ideological leaders of this movement, Periyar? I know that Kamini has commissioned a book, and my friend Venkatachalapati, I think, is working on it, but it's not yet come out. But perhaps, meanwhile, a suggestion to Penguin that maybe the essential Periyar can be published, articles properly translated from Tamil with a good introduction and annotations, and nobody more competent to handle this than your author, who you have captive right now, Kannan. So I think this can be done. It won't take too much time. The proper permissions can be got from Mr. Veerappan and whoever owns the copyright. Maybe it's out of copyright. It's out of copyright. So I think proper translations can be done, a good selection. It needs a fine editing hand, but a good introduction. So I think these are tasks that can be taken up. But back to the subject of this book, M.G.R, A Remarkable Political Life. And Kannan has, with rare diligence, provided us rich detail, provided us insight, provided us anecdotes about the life and times of M.G.R. Also, I think an interesting part of this book is this very special relationship that figured in a movie called Iruvar by Maniratnam between M.G.R. and Kalaignar. M.G.R. older, but very, very close. Mr. Veerappan just told me before this meeting that I asked him, when did you first meet Kalaignar? I think it was about 70 years ago. He said when he met Periyar, it's as far as that. But the relationship between M.G.R. and Kalaignar, often seen as adversarial in the later part, particularly after 1971-72, I think is a remarkable story. And it contrasts with the very poor relationship between political leaders that happened after the passing of M.G.R., when relations were almost poisonous. And two incidents come to mind in this respect, and they are mentioned in, the first one is mentioned in Kannan's book, two moving incidents. As soon as Kalaignar learnt of M.G.R.'s death in December 1987, he rushed to M.G.R.'s garden residence without any publicity and paid his private homage to his old friend and comrade, breaking down in the process. The second is a story that is generally well known, but I heard it in vivid detail from the mouth of the person directly affected, JPR. He was a prominent AIADMK partyman who was traveling with Chief Minister M.G.R. in his car, I think along the beach or somewhere, and he happened to refer to Kalaignar as Karunanidhi. Upon hearing this, Chief Minister M.G.R. flew into a rage, and I have it on the authority of the late JPR that M.G.R. made him get out of the car and walk to whatever his destination was, saying, "How dare you refer to Kalaignar as Karunanidhi?" And there are other anecdotes of this story. So there is a certain underlying decency in this relationship, an appreciation of old times and comradeship and so on, notwithstanding the great damage that was done. The Sarkaria Commission, for example, and later on the very highly adversarial relationship that we saw between the leaders of the two movements, notwithstanding that an underlying civility, an underlying affection, respect. These, I think, are qualities that we must cherish. We must also say, and it is very creditable, that although he's writing a book to commemorate a centenary, birth centenary, he has not fought shy of acknowledging the fact that the second term of M.G.R. was the inauguration of what can be called Tamil Nadu's scientific system of political corruption. Nobody can run away from this. It is a fact of life. And I would date the origins of the system to the founding of, to the incorporation of TASMAC, May 23, 1983. It can be regarded as the founding date of Tamil Nadu's scientific system of political corruption. Because I'm not suggesting prohibition for one moment. I also know that the revenues that came from this whole business financed many good things, including what Sashi mentioned, Tamil Nadu's remarkable midday meal scheme, nutritious midday meal scheme. I remember that World Bank experts questioned it, scoffed at it, even local bureaucrats and so on, but today it's a model for the rest of India. There are many other welfare schemes. Often people call them populist. I don't think you can glibly dismiss all this as populism. Some of it may be, but there's also an underlying safety net, which I think is valuable in this state, which explains why people have been able to tolerate governments which are seen as highly corrupt, but at the same time, they also acknowledge that these schemes are well administered. The midday meal scheme and many other of the welfare programs, including those that Jayalalitha introduced. We must acknowledge this, that they were well run. The public distribution system in Tamil Nadu, there is pilferage, there is siphoning off, but compared with many other states, other than Kerala, whichever party is in power, I think Kerala has that guaranteed scheme where basic needs are met to a large extent, and I would give special credit to the left, of course, but even the Congress has to continue the same scheme, and some of them have done well, like Mr. Antony, and I'm sure Sashi himself, although he calls himself an anti-communist, appreciates these policies. But here, Tamil Nadu, I think whether it's DMK or AIADMK, I think they vie with each other to improve and refine these systems, and I think that's something worth acknowledging. I think I've said enough. The book is quite comprehensive. There's a great deal on film. I leave it to Mr. Veerappan, who was MGR's producer, used to pay MGR a regular salary, and later on he was paid a salary. Even today he's paid a pension, he tells us. He can tell us a great deal about MGR and films. But one final word. This idea that anyone can jump into politics because you're a superstar in films or cricket or whatever is a myth. It's fallacious. MGR grew as part of the Dravidian movement very early on. He was ideologically committed to a large extent, although that ideology, that commitment changed over the decades. But you can't just descend like a god from the machine to lead a party and so on. So anyone who thinks, I'm not referring to any individual here, but anyone who thinks that a superstar can descend from the skies to overcome all your problems, bypassing the dominant parties, is living in a fool's paradise. So with that, I congratulate my friend Kannan and also his mentor Sathi and Kamini Mahadevan for bringing this out, bringing this to fusion, and I also pay my respects to Mr. Veerappan and Mr. N.Ram and other veterans of the Dravidian movement who are here. I am a critic of your movement, but we never underestimate it.
If you like our videos and channel, please like and subscribe.